So we're going to start this hour with the powerful storms that swept across the Midwest yesterday, causing flash flooding. Like in Wichita, we're going to show you where emergency crews were called in to rescue people who were stuck in their cars after they became submerged in the fast-moving flood water. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency there. That's the highest level of flood alert. That came after rainfall rates near 3 inches per hour.
The same system also spawned several suspected tornadoes across the region. This one hit Independence, Missouri, just east of Kansas City. The dark skies and rotating clouds had residents looking for cover, and the strong winds sent debris flying. This is Kauffman Stadium. That's where the Kansas City Royals play. The tornado sirens were activated just before this video was recorded. For the latest on those storms and what you can expect today, let's bring in NBC meteorologist Angie Lastman with your morning News Now weather.
Yeah, Angie, good morning. So what can we expect today? More storms in the forecast?
Hi, guys. Good morning. Yes, unfortunately, we're going to have a chance for more storms, but the good news is it's not going to be quite as robust. We're not going to see as much of a widespread area dealing with this. But yes, a very active 24 hours. And you can see where that line of thunderstorms and that cold front is set up right now as we look at our satellite and radar. We've got some rain from the Great Lakes stretching down to Missouri. We've got a couple of these thunderstorms still centered across parts of Texas. And we've also got some kind of unsettled weather just off the southeast coast. We'll talk about that here in a moment. First, let's focus on the cold front. Notice that it's going to bring that rain kind of shifted a little farther to the east today. Michigan to Missouri is where we'll see the heaviest rain. It's where we'll see those storms today. And then we watch this area of low pressure that's trying to get organized just off the southeast coast. This is going to bring the potential for some heavy rain across parts of this region, not just today, but for tomorrow too, specifically across parts of the coastal Carolinas. That's where we'll watch for the potential for some flooding as we get into your day tomorrow. For today, the severe risk, I said, is much smaller. It's really just centered across parts of Texas and New Mexico where we could see that slight risk, and that means the hail, the wind gusts over 60 miles per hour, and maybe an isolated tornado. Otherwise, where you see the green, those are just general thunderstorms. So again, Michigan to Texas, parts of the southwest also included in that, stretching up into Colorado. But the severe threat, much less than what we've been dealing with. Now, temperature-wise, that's going to get your attention if you live in the Northeast. We're feeling so summer-like. We've got high 80s on tap in Philadelphia today. We've got mid-80s for Norfolk, near 90 for Columbus this afternoon. Memphis expected to hit 90 degrees. And we keep that going for tomorrow, too, potentially seeing some of these isolated record highs across this region, but upper 80s from Baltimore to Philadelphia to New York, and we'll keep the 90s in Hartford as well. These numbers anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees above where they should be for this time of year. So break out the swimsuits, I suppose. We've got cooler conditions, but only slightly cooler conditions on the way for the weekend. New York City bottoms out at 76 degrees for your high on Saturday. We end up back into those upper 70s by Sunday. And honestly, we keep the 80s for Washington, D.C., Louisville through the end of the work week and into the weekend. And we'll even see a couple of 90s out there across parts of the Carolinas. Now, one more note, we've got the wildfire smoke that we're still dealing with. You might have noticed the kind of fiery sunset last night in places like New York City. That's because, of course, that smoke is in those upper levels of the atmosphere. So we're still dealing with some unhealthy air, guys, across parts of the Midwest. That'll last here probably for another day or so. And we'll keep a close eye on it as those fires continue to burn, of course.
All right, Angie's covering it all. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Just days ago, Elon Musk was getting a send-off inside the Oval Office. Well, now he's criticizing the Republicans' so-called Big Beautiful Bill, the centerpiece of President Trump's domestic agenda. In a post on X yesterday, Musk called the bill a, quote, disgusting abomination and said, shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. House Republicans passed the spending bill last month by just one vote. The legislation is now in the hands of the GOP-led Senate, where changes are likely, and that means the House and Senate would have to sort out differences before sending it to the president's desk. House Speaker Mike Johnson reacted yesterday to Musk's criticism.
With all due respect, my friend Elon is terribly wrong about the one big beautiful bill. We had a long conversation, he and I. Spoke for, I think, more than 20 minutes on the telephone. For him to come out and hand the whole bill is to me just very disappointing, very surprising in light of the conversation I had with him.
NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins us now from Washington with the latest. Kelly, good to have you with us. So we know Elon Musk then doubled down later in the day on X saying, quote, in November next year, we fire all politicians who betrayed the American people. Those are pretty strong words. A source familiar with the Musk-Trump relationships telling NBC News there are several issues that are likely behind Musk's frustration that's coming out on social media. What more can you tell us?
Well, good morning, Joe. Certainly, he is no longer the special government employee where he feels bound to support the administration. It is really Musk unleashed here on his own social media platform. With respect to the reasons, there are those who are familiar with the relationship between President Trump and Elon Musk, who say there are a couple of factors, and some of them have to do with his own business interests, or the lack of the electric vehicle credits in this legislation. He also had been advocating for the FAA to use his Starlink satellite system as it deals with changes with air traffic control. Then it was Musk who had offered a friend as a nominee to be a NASA administrator. That was a nomination made and then withdrawn. And then, of course, the issue of his status as a special government employee. By law, that requires 130 days and no more. There are those who are saying that Musk wanted to stay on in some capacity, but the White House opted not to do that, so his government service is over. Musk's team did not respond to our request to see if those reasons do bear out, but it would give you a sense of some of the interests that Musk has and his concerns about this bill. But what is striking is, after being, pardon me, the president's most generous benefactor in terms of the campaign and obviously a very visible presence for the first months of the new administration, now a strong break on a piece of legislation that matters a great deal to President Trump.
Kelly, while we're talking about federal money, the White House sent a request yesterday to congressional leaders to pull back more than $9 billion in approved spending. Most of it's for foreign aid. This would flash funding to, or get rid of funding for the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, also NPR, PBS. Any obstacles in the way of this getting approved?
Well, this is called a rescission, and it is intended to try to take those Musk-generated DOGE cuts, the slashes in departments and budgets, and make them permanent, because that was originally congressionally authorized spending. And this is the administration saying, now we've made a decision to cut this. Will Congress support it? It is not easy, especially with the timeline. There's only 45 days for this kind of legislation to be approved. They're also dealing with the big package that we've talked about. So there are time pressures. These are conservative interests to cut foreign aid and to cut the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is NPR and PBS, and other things like that. It's the kind of stuff we've heard conservatives talking about. They want to make it official. Joe?
And Kelly, while we have you, let's talk climate here. So the Atlantic hurricane season we now know is underway. The White House is responding to something that was said by David Richardson. He's the acting FEMA administrator. Little background: during a meeting Monday, he said he was not aware of the hurricane season. He then said he was joking. What are we learning about all this?
Well, of course, the hurricane season is something that gets a lot of attention and would require enormous resources and coordination from FEMA if, in fact, we have devastating hurricanes, as we have seen in recent years. The question I posed to the press secretary at the briefing dealt with this issue, and because they have cut the size of the workforce and the administrator made this comment, does the president have confidence? Where does that stand? I had an exchange with Caroline Levitt, who says they take this seriously. Again, they think that this comment about not knowing there's a hurricane season was a joke. Here's our exchange. Is he still comfortable with Administrator Richardson, who had talked, whether joking or not, about not being aware of a hurricane season for this country?
Sure. Well, of course, we know that we are into hurricane season now, and I know FEMA is taking this seriously, contrary to some of the reporting we have seen based on jokes that were made and leaks from meetings. But Secretary Kristi Noem and the FEMA leadership are all over this. They are committed to ensuring that federal resources and tax dollars are there for Americans in need.
Of course, President Trump wants a smaller FEMA and wants to redirect resources back to states. That could be a challenge if there are, in fact, these national level disasters that require considerable federal help. So we'll watch this as it plays out June through November for the hurricane season. Joe?
All right, Kelly, thank you.
Well, on the economic front, President Trump's new 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports is now in effect. Canada, Mexico, and parts of Europe are among those that will be hit hardest by this new levy. The UK was granted a reprieve with the tariff remaining at 25%, while a trade deal with with that country continues to be hashed out. The president says the move to double tariffs on metal imports protects the U.S. steel industry. Investopedia editor-in-chief, our friend Caleb Silver, is here to talk more about this. Hey, Caleb, good morning. So what kind of impact will this higher tariff on steel and aluminum have, especially if we anticipate other countries retaliating?
Yeah, and the EU might retaliate. They're not happy about this at all because they say this undermines the negotiations that they're having with the United States on tariffs right now. So if you go from 25 to 50% on tariffs, especially for countries like Germany and Sweden, which import or export a lot of steel and aluminum to the United States, this is pretty punitive for them. Other countries like the UK, as you mentioned, may be spared by this because they are in the economic prosperity deal inked on May 8th with the president. So they may be spared by it, but we have other countries that we import a lot of steel and aluminum from, namely Canada and Mexico. We have not worked out agreements with them yet. That could be very painful for them in terms of the steel and aluminum that are imported into this country. And then think about the automakers that are going to have to pay higher costs that are based here in the U.S. because of those higher tariffs.
Caleb, we've also seen the tensions between the U.S. and China worsen this week. This came after both countries were blaming each other for violating last month's Geneva trade agreement. That included that 90-day pause on most tariffs. Help us to understand what is going on here. And ultimately, are trade talks in danger?
Yeah, they could be. And the president saying this morning that having negotiations with China is becoming more and more difficult. No more Mr. Nice Guy, he said in quotes on social. Don't know what that means, but I think a lot of this is hung up over the rare earth minerals that China has so much control over. Those are minerals we use for auto production. Those are minerals we use for different industrial processes. And that might be the sticking point in terms of the negotiations, at least at this point. So we do have that 90-day reprieve with China that is coming to an end in July, but the closer we get to it, the further apart these negotiations seem right now. They seem to be very good a couple of weeks ago when trade leaders met in Geneva. That seems to be falling apart right now, but anything can happen.
Caleb, remind us, all this back and forth uncertainty, what does it mean for a consumer, and what do we expect to see in the markets today?
Yeah, the markets are responding actually in different areas. There are good results from semiconductor companies out yesterday. So you've seen technology lead the stock market gains over the last couple of days. But we've kind of been in this choppy trading pattern because there is uncertainty now as we approach July 9th, the end of that 90-day reprieve. And there's all these other negotiations happening at the same time. It's very driven right now by headlines. Headlines are driven right now by trade negotiations. As those get more and more choppy, so does the market. But right now, the market's kind of been in a nice little groove, not really doing too much except for responding to the positive news out of the semiconductor sector. For consumers, you're going to expect higher prices, but we haven't seen those quite yet because those tariffs have not yet manifested. We're kind of in this purgatory right now, waiting for a lot of those to take effect. Steel and aluminum will be those very first ones that take effect today. We'll start to feel those in the next couple of weeks.
All right, Caleb Silver, thank you so much.
One of the top prosecutors behind the January 6th investigation is speaking out, and he's warning that President Trump's sweeping pardons for Capitol rioters could have dangerous long-term consequences. His name is Greg Rosen. He led the Justice Department's effort to hold rioters accountable. Rosen sat down with NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley just days after stepping down, saying the pardons send the message that political violence is acceptable.
The prosecutor in charge of investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, sounding the alarm about the independence of the nation's top prosecutors and what President Trump's pardons say about political violence.
To celebrate that is a message to the American people that the rule of law may not matter.
Greg Rosen sitting down with NBC News just days after resigning from the department he believes is becoming politicized. He oversaw the sprawling investigation, with much of the evidence captured by rioters themselves, including brutal assaults on law enforcement.
Those are screams that I hear in body-worn camera and in videos that are hard to shake.
Just logistically, how do you handle such an enormous investigation?
It was a Herculean effort by hundreds of dedicated prosecutors, legal support staff, thousands of federal agents, to get it right.
Rosen's Capitol Siege section was able to secure hundreds of convictions, and even more arrests were in the works. Despite Trump originally pushing for accountability,
to those who broke the law, you will pay.
He changed his tune on the campaign trail.
but that was a day of love.
After taking office, he granted mass clemency to roughly 1,500 Capitol rioters, including members of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers.
The underlying message of the pardons and the expressive nature of the pardons is that political violence is acceptable, particularly if it's done for a specific purpose. And political violence in an American society, in a constitutional republic, is essentially the brain rot of the republic.
Rosen also pushing back on the critics, saying that the prosecutions were well supported.
The reality is, every single case was treated with the utmost scrutiny. And so the concepts that these defendants were railroaded or mistreated is belied by the actual facts.
But his section was quickly shut down after the pardons. Rosen was then demoted to an entry-level position by Trump loyalist Ed Martin, who's now overseeing pardons at the Justice Department. Rosen saying in his resignation letter Friday, "I've learned trust in our institutions, like justice itself, takes decades to build and can quickly erode." White House spokesperson Harrison Fields telling NBC News that Trump, quote, doesn't need lectures from Democrats about his use of pardons, citing former President Joe Biden's pardoning of his son, and saying Trump was using his pardon and commutation powers to right many wrongs. But Rosen sees it differently.
It was appropriate, it was proportional, and it was righteous. And so I would not change a thing about the way we conducted ourselves.
Now he is worried about the brain drain at the DOJ and continued attacks on career law enforcement professionals.
Frankly, it's ridiculous that we are seeing retaliation being taken against people who did their job.
And the impact it will have on the justice system overall.
It sends a terrible message. It sends a message that every aspect of what you do will somehow be politicized, or the word I think that keeps getting used is weaponized. And that's very unfortunate.
And our thanks to Ryan Riley for that report. Rosen also says the cases were thoroughly vetted both inside the Justice Department and in court, with juries and judges from both parties weighing in.
The family of the man accused of the anti-Semitic attack on a march in support of Israeli hostages in Boulder, Colorado, is now in Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody. The Department of Homeland Security says it's investigating what the family potentially knew about the planned attack, which injured at least 12 people. According to the FBI affidavit, suspect Solomon says he acted alone. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky has the latest and warning some of the video is disturbing.
As terror suspect Mohammed Solomon sits in a Colorado jail cell, his wife and 5 children are now in ICE custody, according to the Secretary of Homeland Security.
We're also investigating to what extent his family knew about this horrific attack, if they had any knowledge of it, or if they provided support.
ICE agents taking the family into custody just days after the FBI searched Solomon's Colorado Springs home. After moving to the state 3 years ago, federal officials say the Egyptian national had overstayed a tourist visa, but did have a pending asylum claim. Authorities have not confirmed his family's immigration status. On Sunday, video captured the 45-year-old attacking a rally for Israeli hostages, armed with Molotov cocktails and a makeshift flamethrower.
It's shocking. It's disgusting. I mean, literally seeing this man throwing Molotov cocktails onto human beings.
We spoke to Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfern, who told us once officers took Solomon to the ground, he continued his rant.
The quick response of our officers, community members, the fact that he had 16 other Molotov cocktails there and wasn't able to use those, that is somewhat of a win for us.
At his synagogue, where private security's now backed up by Boulder Police, Rabbi Mark Soloway shared this is where 6 of the 12 victims come to worship.
How would you describe the last 36 hours?
It's been brutal, horrifying, exhausting, so many emotions. Incredible sadness and grief and tremendous anger, too.
He tells us 2 victims, airlifted to Denver, remain hospitalized. As for the man behind this attack, he has this message.
Look at the humanity of these people. I would want him to just see that he just saw lovely, beautiful human beings and destroyed their lives for no reason.
Our thanks to Morgan Chesky for that report. Will Solomon remains in custody on $10 million bond.
Now to the latest in the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs.
Yesterday, the jury heard new details about that disturbing 2016 hotel video, which showed Combs assaulting his then-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. As NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk reports, the testimony focused on the alleged effort to keep that video from emerging.
In federal court, focus on the shocking 2016 video of Sean Combs hitting and kicking his then-girlfriend Cassie Ventura in an L.A. hotel. On the witness stand, a former security guard at the hotel, Eddie Garcia. He says Combs knew the video would be damaging. Combs' assistant calling Garcia after the incident, asking for a copy, according to testimony. When Garcia said no, the assistant showed up in person at the hotel. Garcia testified that he told her to contact his manager at the security company. But then Combs himself called multiple times, sounding nervous, according to Garcia, and telling him the video would ruin his career. Garcia says he and his manager cut a deal to turn it over in exchange for money. He hand-delivered it himself to Combs. He asked if this was the only copy, Garcia told the jury, and I said, I believe so. Garcia says he signed an NDA. Then Combs handed him a brown paper bag with $100,000 in cash. Combs pleaded not guilty to sex trafficking and racketeering charges. Among the federal government's accusations, the hip-hop tycoon used his business, including certain employees, to carry out, facilitate, and cover up his acts of violence. Even with the lurid accusations, Combs still has fans. A woman standing up in court screaming profanities and yelling, "It's not right what they are doing to him." The judge had her quickly removed. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Angela Sanadella. She joins us here on set. Hi, Angela. So this 2016 assault of Cassie Ventura, the video of it seems like it really is a central piece of the case here for the prosecution. Explain, though, from a legal perspective, how this alleged payment of $100,000 to try to keep this video from ever seeing the light of day actually relates to the specific charges that Diddy faces.
Right. So one of the charges that Diddy is facing is conspiracy to commit racketeering, right? And there you have to prove a conspiracy to commit a pattern of racketeering activity, which is really just almost as catch-all for other illegal activity. So one of the illegal actions that are being alleged here is an attempt to obstruct a police probe, attempt to criminally suppress an investigation by law enforcement. So what the prosecution are alluding to is that in giving this payment, they're really strong-arming in an illegal way the suppression of this video, which obviously does seem to include illegal activity, a beating of a woman, from getting out and from being investigated by police.
That sets up my next question here, which is the defense is sort of making this argument that the NDA didn't keep Garcia from speaking with law enforcement. Talk about why they're making that argument.
Right. So the NDA seemed to include what is standard in really all NDAs, which is that nothing in this agreement prohibits a party from cooperating with law enforcement. So what the defense was trying to do here is say whether or not they didn't engage or participate in a police probe wasn't Diddy's fault. It was actually their choice. That Diddy was not involved in this. That's what they are getting at. But I also have to say that in the redirect, the prosecution, though, did note that there's also this provision that requires them to notify the company and notify someone who would be in Diddy's position, which in that case would possibly prevent someone from being willing to speak out if they had to notify someone who's an alleged criminal.
Absolutely. We also heard from a former senior executive at Combs' company, Bad Boy Entertainment. What did we learn there?
So we heard from the CFO and Derek Ferguson. This was instrumental because it proved a lot of corroboration here of Cassie's mother's testimony. So Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, previously testified that Diddy had demanded that she pay him $20,000 in order to prevent sexually explicit images of Cassie from getting out. And so that could go to extortion, but that also could go to just this pattern of criminal activity, this pattern of suppressing information from getting out.
Looking ahead to tomorrow, we expect to hear from another one of Combs' alleged victims. She's being called Jane. She'll have her identity protected as well. What can we expect with this? Why is this important?
So we expect to see this, again, this pattern, which is really important for the prosecution to prove. So the prosecutors did foreshadow that we might see some sort of payment again happening, payment of rent, or kind of allowing her to stay in her house in exchange for her silence. And this sort of activity would again go to suppressing these victims from speaking out, and also to Diddy's company as a criminal enterprise that just continually does this, continually, allegedly, stops information of criminal activity from getting out.